Imagine this. One day, everything feels normal. You wake up, go through your routine, and expect life to unfold as it always has. Then, without warning, everything unravels. You lose your job. The person you trusted and loved walks away. A devastating loss strikes, leaving behind an emptiness that feels impossible to fill. It happens so fast that you barely have time to breathe, and before you know it, you are left staring at the ruins of what once felt like a stable, predictable life. You sit alone, staring at the ceiling, your mind drowning in questions that have no answers. Why is this happening to me? What did I do to deserve this? The world feels cold, indifferent, and unfair. The things you once counted on, security, love, certainty, have all been ripped away. And in that moment, everything seems meaningless. We've all been there, trapped in a moment where life feels like it's spiraling beyond our control. It's terrifying, disorienting, and cruel. But what if I told you that this very pain, this loss, this unraveling, might be the greatest thing that has ever happened to you? What if the disaster you see before you isn't a punishment, but an opportunity in disguise? People say, everything happens for a reason. But do you really understand what that means? Stay with me, because once you do, your entire world will shift. And if you could see life through the eyes of a Stoic, you might just realize that everything you once feared was leading you exactly where you needed to go. 1. Stoic awareness. Life isn't against you, it's training you. If you could see life through the eyes of a Stoic, you might just realize that everything you once feared was leading you exactly where you needed to go. But that's not how most people see it. Instead, when life throws obstacles in their way, they panic, resist, and fight against reality. They ask, "Why is this happening to me?" instead of asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" That's where the difference lies. Some people crumble under pressure and others rise. Some let circumstances define them, and others use those same circumstances as fuel to become something greater than they ever imagined. The ancient Stoics understood a profound truth that modern society often ignores. Life does not exist to serve you. It exists to test you, to refine you, and to strip away all that is unnecessary so that you can become the strongest version of yourself. The pain, the setbacks, the losses, they are not punishments. They are not cosmic injustices. They are weights designed to forge a mind so resilient that nothing can shake it. This is what Marcus Aurelius meant when he said in Meditations, Book 5, Section 20, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." The very thing that appears to block your path is, in fact, the path itself. Take Abraham Lincoln, for example. If there was ever a man who had every excuse to give up, to let bitterness consume him, it was him. Born into poverty, he lost his mother at the age of 9. His first love died. He failed in business. He ran for political office and lost. Then he lost again, and again. He suffered from deep depression, often writing letters to friends describing his hopelessness. He faced relentless criticism, heartbreak, and self-doubt. Yet through it all, he endured. He didn't see failure as the end of the road. He saw it as part of the journey. Each setback, each heartbreak, each crushing defeat was sharpening him, toughening him, preparing him. When the time finally came for him to lead the United States through its darkest hour, the Civil War, he was ready, because by then he had been broken so many times that he had become unbreakable. The world remembers Lincoln as one of the greatest leaders in history, but what most people fail to see is that his greatness was forged through suffering. Without his trials, without his losses, without his failures, he would have never become the man who could hold a nation together when it was falling apart. His life is a testament to a Stoic truth. Adversity is not an obstacle. It is a sculptor, shaping you into something stronger, wiser, and more capable than you were before. But that's not how most people approach hardship. Instead, they see struggle as a signal to stop. They let rejection make them bitter. They let loss make them fearful. They let failure convince them that they were never meant to succeed in the first place. And so they stay stuck. They remain trapped in a cycle of victimhood, unable to move forward because they believe life is unfair, as if fairness was ever a guarantee. The Stoics rejected this illusion. They understood that pain is inevitable, but suffering is a choice. The difference: pain is what happens to you. Suffering is what you tell yourself about it. Two people can experience the exact same hardship, and yet one emerges stronger while the other falls apart. The only difference is their perception of the event. This is why Stoicism is so powerful. It shifts the focus from what is out of your control to what is within it. It forces you to confront the truth that no one wants to admit. You are responsible for how you interpret your experiences. You cannot control what happens, but you can control what it means to you. History is filled with stories of individuals who turned obstacles into stepping stones. Thomas Edison, who failed over 10,000 times before inventing the light bulb. Nelson Mandela, who spent 27 years in prison but emerged not with hatred but with wisdom, eventually leading his country out of apartheid. These are not stories of men who had easy lives. These are stories of men who understood that suffering could be turned into strength. And yet today, most people see hardship as a reason to quit rather than a reason to grow. This is where your power lies. You are not helpless. The adversity you face today is the very thing that will shape you into the person you are meant to become, if you allow it. But it won't happen by accident. You have to choose to see things differently. You have to decide that you will no longer be a victim of your circumstances, but a master of them. The next time you face a setback, ask yourself, is this happening to me, or is this happening for me? The answer to that question will determine the course of your life. Those who see hardship as a punishment will retreat, crumble, and live their lives in fear. But those who see it as training will rise, endure, and eventually overcome. Because life is not against you. It is not trying to break you. It is trying to make you unbreakable. 2. Loss is not the end. It's a setup for something greater. When life strikes you down, you are left with a choice. You can curse the heavens, ask why the world is so cruel, and wallow in the unfairness of it all. Or you can do what the greatest minds in history have done, use suffering as a forge to create something extraordinary. Every person who has ever risen from rock bottom to greatness has understood one truth: loss is not the end. It is the preparation for something greater. It's easy to think that pain is a sign that life is working against you, that hardship is a punishment. But if you look deeper, you will see that the worst things that ever happened to you were often the catalysts for the most profound transformations. The betrayal that forced you to rebuild your trust in yourself, the failure that pushed you to sharpen your skills, the heartbreak that made you redefine what love really means. In the moment, loss feels like destruction. But in hindsight, you often see that it was reconstruction. History offers no shortage of evidence. One of the most striking examples is Viktor Frankl, a respected psychologist before World War II. He was captured and sent to a Nazi concentration camp, where he lost his parents, his wife, and nearly everything he had ever known. He witnessed suffering beyond comprehension. Yet, instead of letting despair consume him, he used his suffering as a source of meaning. He observed that those who survived were not necessarily the strongest, but those who could find a reason to keep going. And from that realization, he wrote Man's Search for Meaning, a book that would go on to change millions of lives. Epictetus, another survivor of hardship, taught the same lesson thousands of years before. Born a slave, he had no control over his circumstances. He was beaten, mistreated, and left physically disabled. Yet he refused to let his suffering define him. Instead, he transformed it into wisdom, teaching generations to come that suffering is not about what happens to us, but how we respond to it. As he put it in Discourses, Book 1, Chapter 6, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. This is not just philosophy, it is the very foundation of survival, resilience, and growth. Every day, people allow their losses to consume them. They become trapped in their stories of pain, replaying the same moments over and over in their minds, convincing themselves that their best days are behind them. But what if loss wasn't a dead end? What if it was a redirection? The Stoics believed that everything that happens is part of a greater order, that fate is not random but intentional. They didn't ask, "Why is this happening to me?" Instead, they asked, "What can I make of this?" The same principle applies to relationships, careers, and personal setbacks. A person who is abandoned by someone they love can let it break them, or they can use it to rediscover themselves. A failed business venture can be seen as proof of incompetence, or it can be the foundation for a more informed, resilient entrepreneur. In every loss, there are two roads. One leads to bitterness, regret, and stagnation. The other leads to wisdom, growth, and transformation. If you are experiencing a loss right now, understand this. You are standing at the crossroads of your future. The pain you feel is real. The hardship is undeniable. But you have the power to define what it means. Will this be the event that breaks you, or will it be the moment that shapes you into someone you never thought possible? This is not abstract theory. It is a challenge. Right now, take a piece of paper and write down 3 of the biggest failures or losses in your life. Look at them not as tragedies, but as lessons. What did they teach you? How did they change you? If you cannot see the lesson yet, step back and ask yourself, what if this was preparing me for something greater? What if, years from now, I look back and see this as the moment everything changed for the better? The Stoics knew that life's trials were inevitable, but they also knew that suffering was optional. It is not the event that defines you, but your interpretation of it. If you can master this, if you can look hardship in the face and say, "This will make me stronger," then nothing, not loss, not failure, not even death, can break you. 3. Those who blame their circumstances always fail. Those who blame their circumstances often find themselves trapped in cycles of failure, unable to move forward because they have convinced themselves that life has conspired against them. They tell themselves that they are victims of fate, powerless to change their reality. Instead of searching for solutions, they seek excuses. Instead of taking action, they wait for external forces to shift in their favor. This mindset is one of the most destructive traps a person can fall into because it robs them of their agency, their responsibility, and ultimately, their potential for growth. Psychologist Martin Seligman coined the term learned helplessness to describe this phenomenon. In a series of studies, he found that when individuals repeatedly experience negative situations where they feel powerless, they eventually stop trying, even when they are later given the opportunity to escape. They learn to see themselves as victims, even when a way forward exists. This is what happens to many people who have faced hardship. They internalize the belief that they are doomed to suffer, that effort is futile, and that the world is simply against them. But the truth is, suffering is often prolonged not by external events, but by an unwillingness to take responsibility for one's own life. Nowhere is this mindset more tragic than in the lives of those who had every opportunity to change, but chose instead to surrender to their circumstances. Chris Farley, the once beloved comedian from Saturday Night Live, is a haunting example of this self-destructive cycle. He had immense talent, fame, and financial success, but he also struggled with addiction. Instead of taking control, he repeatedly blamed the pressures of the entertainment industry, the expectations placed upon him, and the weight of fame. Friends, colleagues, and mentors tried to intervene, offering him countless chances to recover. But as long as he believed his situation was beyond his control, he never truly fought to escape it. His story ended in tragedy, not because he lacked the means to change, but because he lacked the belief that change was possible. Another example is Lance Armstrong, a once revered champion who fell from grace due to his own actions, yet spent years refusing to take responsibility. Armstrong was a symbol of perseverance, having survived cancer and gone on to dominate the world of professional cycling, winning 7 Tour de France titles. However, his success was built on a web of deceit and performance-enhancing drugs. When allegations of doping surfaced, instead of admitting his mistakes, he blamed the media, his rivals, and a supposed vendetta against him. He aggressively denied any wrongdoing, attacked his accusers, and even sued people who spoke out against him. For years, Armstrong convinced himself that the system was against him, refusing to acknowledge that he had made a choice to cheat, to lie, and to protect a false legacy. His unwillingness to take responsibility ultimately led to his complete downfall. When the truth could no longer be hidden, he was stripped of his titles, banned from professional cycling, and lost millions in sponsorships. His story did not end in failure because he made mistakes, but because he refused to own them. The Stoics understood that blaming external factors is the surest way to stagnation. They taught that the only thing truly within our control is our reaction to what happens. Epictetus, who was born a slave and later became one of the greatest philosophers of his time, could have easily resigned himself to misery. He could have cursed his fate, blamed the injustice of the world, and accepted his suffering. Instead, he took responsibility for his mind, his actions, and his perspective. He turned adversity into wisdom, teaching that it is not events that disturb people, but their judgments about them. The difference between those who rise and those who remain stuck is not their circumstances, but their response to them. Many people spend their entire lives blaming their upbringing, their past mistakes, their lack of resources, or the unfairness of the world. But the moment they accept that they cannot control everything around them, but they can always control their reaction, is the moment they become free. The Stoics did not believe in passively accepting suffering. They believed in mastering oneself in spite of it. This is where the path divides. On one side are those who see difficulty as an excuse to remain where they are. On the other side are those who take full ownership of their choices, their mindset, and their actions. The question is, which path will you choose? 4. How successful people turn pain into power. Loss does not mean the end. It means transformation. When life strikes you down, you are left with a choice. You can curse the heavens, ask why the world is so cruel, and wallow in the unfairness of it all. Or you can do what the greatest minds in history have done, use suffering as a forge to create something extraordinary. Every person who has ever risen from rock bottom to greatness has understood one truth. Loss is not a conclusion. It is the beginning of something greater. Pain often feels like a sign that life is working against you, that hardship is a punishment. But if you look deeper, you will see that the worst things that ever happened to you were often the catalysts for the most profound transformations. The betrayal that forced you to rebuild your trust in yourself, the failure that pushed you to sharpen your skills, the heartbreak that made you redefine what love really means. In the moment, loss feels like destruction, but in hindsight, you often see that it was reconstruction. The events that seemed unbearable were simply clearing the way for a stronger version of yourself. History offers no shortage of evidence. Viktor Frankl, a respected psychologist before World War II, was captured and sent to a Nazi concentration camp, where he lost his parents, his wife, and nearly everything he had ever known. He witnessed suffering beyond comprehension. Yet, instead of letting despair consume him, he used his suffering as a source of meaning. He observed that those who survived were not necessarily the strongest, but those who could find a reason to keep going. And from that realization, he wrote Man's Search for Meaning, a book that would go on to change millions of lives. His suffering was not the end of his story. It was the beginning of his purpose. Epictetus, another survivor of hardship, taught the same lesson thousands of years before. Born a slave, he had no control over his circumstances. He was beaten, mistreated, and left physically disabled. Yet he refused to let his suffering define him. Instead, he transformed it into wisdom, teaching generations to come that suffering is not about what happens to us, but how we respond to it. As he put it in Discourses, Book 1, Chapter 6, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. This is not just philosophy, it is the very foundation of survival, resilience, and growth. His chains may have bound his body, but his mind remained unbreakable, and that is what made him free. People allow their losses to consume them every single day. They become trapped in their stories of pain, replaying the same moments over and over in their minds, convincing themselves that their best days are behind them. But what if loss wasn't a dead end? What if it was a redirection? The Stoics believed that everything that happens is part of a greater order, that fate is not random, but intentional. They didn't ask, "Why is this happening to me?" Instead, they asked, "What can I make of this?" Adversity does not change you, it reveals you. When everything is going well, it's easy to believe you are strong, confident, and capable. But only when you lose something do you see what truly remains. Loss strips away the illusions, the comfort, the distractions, and shows you the core of who you really are. Some people collapse under this revelation, seeing only weakness. Others recognize that this moment of truth is an opportunity to rebuild, to redefine, to rise. J.K. Rowling, before becoming one of the best-selling authors of all time, hit rock bottom. She was divorced, unemployed, and struggling as a single mother, barely surviving. But in her lowest moments, she realized something profound. She had nothing left to lose. With that clarity, she dedicated herself fully to writing, and Harry Potter was born. Later, she said, Rock bottom became the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. This is the power of loss. It forces you to decide what truly matters and what you are willing to fight for. Michael Jordan, after being cut from his high school basketball team, could have accepted that he wasn't good enough. Instead, he used that rejection as fuel, spending countless hours refining his game, turning himself into one of the greatest athletes of all time. He later admitted that he had failed over and over again, missed thousands of shots, lost hundreds of games, and that failure was precisely what led to his success. If you are experiencing a loss right now, understand this: you are standing at the crossroads of your future. The pain you feel is real, the hardship is undeniable, but you have the power to define what it means. Will this be the event that breaks you, or will it be the moment that shapes you into someone you never thought possible? This is not abstract theory. It is a challenge. Right now, take a piece of paper and write down 3 of the biggest failures or losses in your life. Look at them not as tragedies, but as lessons. What did they teach you? How did they change you? If you cannot see the lesson yet, step back and ask yourself, what if this was preparing me for something greater? What if, years from now, I look back and see this as the moment everything changed for the better? Marcus Aurelius, in Meditations, often reminded himself that the obstacles in his path were not stopping him, they were guiding him. The challenge you are facing right now may feel insurmountable, but it is shaping you into someone stronger than you can imagine. The Stoics knew that life's trials were inevitable, but they also knew that suffering was optional. It is not the event that defines you, but your interpretation of it. If you can master this, if you can look hardship in the face and say, "This will make me stronger," then nothing, not loss, not failure, not even death, can break you. The truth is, loss is not the end. It never was. It is the beginning of a new chapter, one where you are no longer controlled by what happened to you, but empowered by what you choose to do with it. The only question left is, will you let this moment define you, or will you define it? 5. The ultimate truth. Life is not testing you, it is training you. Most people move through life under the illusion that they are victims of circumstance. They believe that suffering is proof of life's cruelty, that hardship is a punishment, that setbacks are signs they were never meant to succeed. But the truth is far greater than that. Life is not punishing you, it is preparing you. You are not being broken, you are being built. The world is not working against you, it is working on you. Every loss, every failure, every painful moment is not the end of your story. It is the foundation of something greater, something you cannot yet see. The Stoics never saw misfortune as random. They understood that every event, no matter how painful, was part of a larger process, one that was not designed to destroy you, but to refine you. Marcus Aurelius, in Meditations, Book 4, Section 49, wrote, "Everything that happens is as familiar and expected as the rose in spring and the fruit in summer." He understood that struggle is not an exception to life's rules. It is life's rule. Hardships are not interruptions to your journey. They are the journey. And the moment you realize this, suffering no longer feels like suffering. It feels like training. Helen Keller understood this better than most. She was born into a world of silence and darkness, deaf and blind from infancy. By every conventional standard, she should have been powerless, trapped in a reality where communication was impossible, where progress was out of reach. But she did not see her suffering as a limitation. She used it. Through sheer determination and the guidance of her teacher, Anne Sullivan, she learned to read, write, and speak. She became a best-selling author, a global activist, a voice for millions who had none. The very thing that should have held her back became the very thing that propelled her forward. Without her suffering, she would not have become the legend she is today. She was not just surviving fate, she was using it. This is what Stoicism teaches. It does not ask you to simply accept fate. It asks you to use it. The Stoics called this amor fati, the love of fate. Not just tolerating what happens, but embracing it fully, recognizing that every challenge, every difficulty, every obstacle is exactly what you need to become, who you were meant to be. The world does not owe you comfort. It does not exist to make things easy for you. It exists to shape you, to forge you through fire, to carve out every weakness until what remains is something unshakable. But most people resist. They spend years asking, "Why me?" They dwell on past pain, replaying the same moments in their minds, convinced that their best days are behind them. They see hardship as proof that life is unfair, rather than seeing it as an invitation to rise. And in doing so, they miss the greatest truth of all. Every setback is a setup. Every fall is a lesson. Every failure is an opportunity. The only question is whether you will use it. You can spend your life playing the victim, blaming circumstances, waiting for the world to change, or you can take control of your own story. You can decide right now that nothing, no pain, no loss, no betrayal, will define you except your own choices, because at the end of the day, that is the only power you truly have. The power to decide what your suffering will mean, the power to turn wounds into wisdom, the power to look at what was meant to destroy you and say, "This will make me unstoppable." If you are struggling right now, if you feel like life is testing you, ask yourself, what if this is not a test? What if this is training? What if 10 years from now you will look back and realize that this moment, this pain, this loss, this uncertainty was the very thing that made you unbreakable? What if everything you are going through right now is setting you up for something far greater than you can imagine? Look at your own life. Think of a moment when you went through something that at the time felt unbearable. Maybe it was a heartbreak, a failure, a time when you felt lost and alone. Now ask yourself, how did that experience change you? Did it make you stronger, wiser, more resilient? The pain that once seemed like the end, does it now seem like a turning point? If you can see that in your past, why wouldn't it be the same now? Why wouldn't today's struggle be preparing you for tomorrow's strength? Every challenge you have faced has led you to this moment, and every challenge from here on will shape the person you are becoming. You are not being tested, you are being prepared, and one day you will look back and realize that the things you thought were breaking you were the very things that built you. So stop resisting, stop seeing hardship as an enemy. The world is not here to comfort you, it is here to forge you. And the sooner you embrace that, the sooner you stop suffering, not because pain disappears, but because you finally understand its purpose. Right now, take a moment to look back at your own life. Find a moment of hardship that once seemed unbearable. Now write down how it shaped you. What did it teach you? How did it make you stronger? And now ask yourself, if that pain was necessary for your growth, could today's struggles be necessary too? Could this very moment be the foundation of something extraordinary? Because the truth is, you are not being broken. You are being built. 6. The 7-day Stoic training. Master your mind, master your life. For the next 7 days, commit to something that most people will never do, taking full control of your mind. This is not just a challenge, it is a mental transformation, a shift in perspective that will change the way you experience failure, hardship, and even success. It will push you to stop reacting and start choosing. It will force you to strip away weakness and replace it with resilience, but only if you are willing to do the work. Starting today, look back at your life and write down the 3 greatest failures or hardships you have ever faced. The moments that tested you, broke you, made you question everything. Instead of seeing them as misfortunes, search for the lesson. Ask yourself, what strength did this give me? What did I gain that I never would have gained otherwise? The Stoics believed that setbacks are not punishments, they are invitations to grow. Everything you once saw as an obstacle was actually shaping you into who you are today. But if you don't recognize this, if you don't reframe the past, you will continue to carry it as a burden instead of using it as fuel. From this moment on, whenever something goes wrong, pause. Before your emotions take over, before frustration blinds you, ask yourself, if this is happening for a reason, what is it? Most people allow their first reaction to dictate their reality. The Stoics did not. They trained themselves to see beyond the surface. It is never the event itself that destroys you. It is how you interpret it. Change your interpretation, and you change everything. The next step is to take control of who and what influences your mind. Look around you. Who do you spend the most time with? What kind of content do you consume? What thoughts do you allow to repeat in your mind? Your mindset is not just shaped by your choices, it is shaped by your environment. If you are surrounded by negativity, by distractions, by people who drain you, you will never reach the level of clarity and discipline you need. Seneca, in Letters to Lucilius, Letter 7, warned, "Associate with those who will make a better man of you." You cannot build strength in a weak environment. Today, identify 3 influences that are pulling you down, whether they are relationships, habits, or mental patterns, and set firm boundaries. And now, step into discomfort on purpose. Do something difficult. Take a cold shower, go without food for a day, wake up earlier than usual, walk instead of driving. The Stoics trained themselves to endure discomfort so that when real hardship came, they were ready. True strength is built by deliberately choosing discomfort before life forces it upon you. Accept everything that happens to you over the next few days without complaint. The flight is delayed? Accept it. Someone speaks to you with disrespect? Accept it. Your plans fall apart. Accept it. Not because you are weak, but because resisting reality only causes suffering. The Stoics practiced amor fati, the love of fate, the ability to embrace whatever happens with full trust that it is part of a larger plan. This is not passivity. This is supreme strength, the ability to stand firm in any storm, unmoved, unshaken. Now take all of this and ask yourself one final question. When your time is up, how do you want to be remembered? What kind of person do you want to be? What legacy do you want to leave? Write it down, your personal philosophy, your guiding principles, the things that truly matter to you. Then look at your daily life and ask yourself, am I living in a way that reflects this? For the next 7 days, commit to this practice. Reflect on your failures, reframe your struggles, control your reactions, eliminate negativity, step into discomfort, accept reality fully, contemplate your mortality, and above all, live with purpose. Because in the end, life will not wait for you to be ready. The world will not stop testing you, but after this, you will not need it to be easier. You will be stronger. This is not just a challenge. It is a new way of living. The only question now is, will you actually do it? Life will not always make sense in the moment. When you are in the middle of struggle, when things fall apart, when the path ahead seems unclear, it is easy to believe that you are lost. But looking back, you will see that every challenge, every failure, and every painful moment was leading you somewhere. You were not being punished. You were being prepared. Every obstacle was carving out a stronger, wiser, more resilient version of you. The question now is, how will you choose to see your life? Will you continue to believe that you are a victim of circumstance, that misfortune is random and meaningless? Or will you embrace the truth that every event, good or bad, is shaping you into the person you are meant to be? This is the foundation of Stoicism. You cannot control what happens to you, but you can always control what it means to you. And in that power lies your freedom. If this message resonated with you, don't just let it fade away. Apply it. Start the 7-day Stoic Challenge today and see how your perspective shifts. Reflect on your greatest struggles, practice reframing hardship, and step into the mindset of someone who is no longer controlled by life, but in control of themselves. And most importantly, share your experience. Drop a comment below and tell me, what was the hardest lesson you ever had to learn, and how did it change you? If this video brought you value, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so we can continue growing this community of resilience, wisdom, and strength. Someone out there needs this message today. Be the person who shares it with them. And I'll leave you with one final challenge. The next time something goes wrong, stop. Don't react. Don't resist. Instead, ask yourself, how is this happening for me? Because the moment you shift that perspective, everything changes. See you in the next video.